writing for The Guardian and other newspapers. So following Remona's talk today, we'll have time for discussion and question and answers. So there should be a paper distributed throughout the room. So if you think of questions while she's speaking, please do write them down. But we will also be opening the floor. So yeah, that'll be at the end as well as refreshments. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Can I pull this back a bit? Or is that going to do something? Maybe. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It's really great to be here. Sorry about the delay in the proceedings. I'm really happy to be here at Cambridge. I'm actually a student from, well, not a student anymore, but from Royal Holloway. And I don't know if you know, but that used to be the place. There was a reputation of being the Cambridge, Oxford rejects used to go there. I don't know if that still carries weight now, but I didn't even apply to Cambridge or Oxford, so I can't even be in that category. But I'm really happy to be here, and also it's amazing that this university has a history of Islamic studies that goes back 350 years, so I feel very much at home. So I want to begin my presentation by asking the question, does Islam need better PR? To answer that, you only need to look at images like these ones that tend to dominate the public consciousness surrounding Muslims. There are news stories every day that seek to perpetuate the narrative that Islam means isolation, rage, oppression, that Muslims are outside of society. If you just look at one of the headlines from our wonderful newspaper, The Sun, Muslim thugs aged just 12 in knife attack on Brit schoolboy. If you look at the terminology, they're talking about a British schoolboy as being the victim of this attack, and that Muslims can't be British. And also they're calling children, 12-year-olds, thugs. So that is incredibly problematic. Now the Cardiff University came up with a study in 2008 that looked at the representation of British Muslims in print media in the UK between 2000 and 2008. And the most common nouns used about Muslims were, I mean, I can open it to the floor. You can imagine what kind of words they used. Just someone give me an example of what they think might have been used.
Terrorist.
Yeah. 5 points. Yeah, exactly. Terrorist, extremist, radical. Only 2% of news stories about Muslims involve them having any moral values. So it's this notion that is engulfing an entire group of people. Muslims seem to have a monopoly over the role of terrorist or extremist. According to Professor Jonathan Brown of Georgetown University, 0.006% of the Muslim global population belong to terrorist organizations. Yet the Muslim as aggressor is one that carries the most media weight. If we just look at the recent horrific Chapel Hill shootings, that is a very frustrating example of not fitting the current narrative. The T word was not used, not to describe the perpetrator. But if the roles were reversed, I think it would be a very different story. Chris Rock summed it up in a tweet where he said, victims equals Muslims, killer equals white. If identities were reversed, media coverage would be non-stop. Now, if you Google Muslim women, 90% of the images that come up are like this one. This is what I call the Google gap, that puts a chasm between lived reality and projected illusion of the Muslim community. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but it's not the normative image of Muslims who have an incredibly diverse makeup, as reflected in images from Emel magazine, where I used to be deputy editor. Now, Emel magazine was a British Muslim lifestyle magazine that articulated the British Muslim identity, and it gave a platform for many British Muslims. Emel reflected a sense of belonging and how Muslims are a part of the fabric of British society. I actually put this one up there because it's a shame that this image is cropped, but he's actually brandishing a badminton racket. His name is Amir Ghaffar, and he won the Canadian Open in 2004, as well as winning a silver medal in the 2006 Commonwealth Games. Now I like it because it really challenges stereotypes immediately. But Amir Ghaffar and the other images that you saw there are not ones that we see in the mainstream media. Now, the media is a reactionary model, and in a post 9/11 world, there has been a constant pressure on Muslims to be reactive and to condemn extremist acts. And that is, I feel, very, very problematic, as the expectation on Muslims to condemn leads to a warped notion of collective culpability. Of course, there is a moral duty to speak out against all acts of oppression, but when this is only in response to that current expectation and compulsion, which suggests that silence can mean potential complicity, then that is incredibly worrying. If Muslims are pressured into apologising for acts of terror, then that only perpetuates the notion that Muslims can be only talked about in terms of extremism and violence, and that's a very damaging framework. I will get on to the Prezi in a second, I'm just giving a bit of a preamble. Now, George Lakoff is an American cognitive linguist who studies language and metaphor and the way it frames debate and attitudes. And he wrote a book called Don't Think of an Elephant, Know Your Values and Frame the Debate. That was about American politics, but actually it's a really, really important book to read. In it, in the introduction, it states, attacking our opponent's frame reinforces their narrative. It continues, our job is to frame our own values, vision and mission, and avoid attacking theirs. We need to take a lead, frame our own stories. We need to say what we stand for. That's the only way that we can actually move forward towards a society based on shared goals and universal values. And that's exactly what I do in my work. Exploring Islam Foundation was created in 2009, and it's a foundation that challenges misconceptions and stereotypes around Muslims and Islam. And we want to raise awareness in positive ways using media. Now, we're a group of young British Muslims. We come from a diverse background, we're editors, we're management consultants, we're graphic designers, and we're really concerned about the public perception that Muslims have. So we wanted to reach out to people and engage. Now, in 2010, we commissioned a YouGov poll to gauge the public perception of Muslims and Islam. It revealed that 1 in 2 Britons associate Islam with extremism and terrorism, so that's half the UK. 41% disagreed or strongly disagreed that Muslims have a positive impact on society, and only 4% thought that Islam has anything to do with justice. So we launched the Inspired by Muhammad campaign. And that focused on Islamic values that are also universal values that the Prophet, peace be upon him, championed. We focused on social justice, women's rights, and the environment. Now, this campaign appeared on London Transport. It was on a number of underground stations, at bus shelters, and on a fleet of the capital's iconic taxis. All the visuals directed people to a website which hosted more information about these areas, and also others like coexistence, education, healthcare, animal welfare, and human rights. The website also included the basics of Islamic belief and a biography of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now, the Inspired by Muhammad campaign was significant because it highlighted what Muslims stood for. This was a defining narrative. We thought that we might get maybe one piece in The Guardian if we were lucky back then, and this poster-led campaign was only up for 2 weeks, but actually we had coverage from all over the world. We got coverage all across the UK, from Europe, from India, America, Canada, New Zealand, France. It was everywhere, and it was really quite overwhelming. Even like BBC Big Question shaped their programme around our campaign, asking, does Islam need better PR? For once, it was a positive story about Muslims, about British Muslims who reflect a wider spectrum of the Muslim community, and we were creating our own constructive media space. It showed how Muslims in all of our different spheres are doing our bit for British society, and it was inspired by the prophetic model, who was a model of coexistence.
By Muhammad campaign aims to redefine how
this was just one piece of coverage in BBC London,
which found that half of us
but I don't think you're going to see it now. Would you want to see it?
Around
See
two-thirds
it a
of
little
us
bit
think
better.
Islam encourages the repression of women. Only 13% of people think Islam is a religion of peace, while fewer than 1 in 5 of us feel that the Muslim faith has a positive impact on Britain. Well, our reporter Alice Vandergraaf has been speaking to some of those involved with the campaign.
Challenging stereotypes, British Muslims gathered today at the British Academy, concerned about the public perception of their religion.
There's a lack of awareness out there, a lack of access.
I'm going to forward that bit. You don't need to see me here twice. So that theme of coexistence is something that we developed for our second campaign, which was called Missing Pages, and that was launched in 2011, and it highlighted the stories of solidarity between Muslims and Jews, and it voiced unity with Holocaust Memorial Day. We wanted to make clear that anti-Semitism goes completely against Islamic teachings and that any injustice and oppression is forbidden. Historians like Bernard Lewis and Norman Stillman actually argued that anti-Semitism was an alien concept in Islam. Rather, it was something that was imported through the contact with Europe in the 19th and 20th century. Bernard Lewis wrote that European anti-Semitism in both its theological and racist versions was essentially alien to Islamic traditions, culture and modes of thought. Through the Missing Pages campaign, we wanted to highlight a relationship that goes back to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and that geopolitical tensions should not overshadow this relationship. You know, one of the Prophet's first acts after his immigration to Medina was to establish an agreement with the Jews and the Christians and pagans of that city, which would ensure them full rights, respect for their beliefs and protection. This constitution was known as the Charter of Medina, and it was written in 622. That's almost 6 centuries before the Magna Carta, and well over 1,000 years before the American Constitution of 1787. Now, for the Missing Pages campaign, we focused on the stories of World War II mainly, of how Muslims saved Jews from the Nazis, with a particular focus on the Albanian Muslims who sheltered Jewish families at risk to their own lives. So this book is actually a compilation by the American Jewish photographer called Norman Gershman. And he went to Albania over a period of about 8 years, and he documented all of the stories from Albanian Muslim families about how they sheltered Jews during World War II under their code of Besa. Now, there are many more stories on the website that we feature, like the rector of Paris Mosque, Sika de Bengabrit, who hid Jews in the underground caverns of the Grand Mosque of Paris. And there were also Algerian sheikhs and imams who would speak at Friday prayers denouncing the anti-Semitic acts and cruelty of the French Vichy regime, who were demanding that Muslims help them in their pogroms against the Jews, and even offered Muslims confiscated Jewish goods. Now, pictured here on your left is Sheikh Abdulhamid Ben Badis, who also was a journalist, incidentally, and wrote against the Vichy regime. And these two were amongst and the other guy's called Sheikh Tayyib al-Uqbi, and they both publicly denounced the anti-Jewish laws. The historian Robert Satloff wrote a really good book, which I'd recommend you to read, called Among the Righteous: Lost Stories from the Holocaust's Long Reach into Arab Lands. Now, he said, to their great credit, not a single Arab in Algiers stepped forward to accept Vichy's offer. Despite economic difficulties faced by the Arabs, they refused to take advantage of Jewish suffering for personal gain. Now, these stories are largely unknown, but that Muslims actually rescued Jews from the Nazis, that there was solidarity between them, but actually we need these stories more than ever today. It was a powerful campaign that got coverage in the BBC and papers like the New Statesman, Deutsche Welle, Jewish Chronicle, but at the same time, the Egyptian Revolution took off, so it didn't get as much coverage, unfortunately, because a lot of the papers wanted to cover the revolution rather than our campaign, which is not really that surprising. So, but we did want to highlight positive stories for the media, but it also made a big impact on grassroots and interfaith organisations anyway. So I want to just finish off by coming back to today. In a more personal capacity, I write for The Guardian on faith and identity. I found that sometimes the best way to approach writing about faith in mainstream media is by using humour and lightheartedness. Sometimes I verge on irreverence. But I think that it's a really important way to break down barriers and to reach audiences. You know, for example, I wrote a piece called 9 Uses for a Burqa That Don't Involve Bashing Them. This piece came about following the escape of the terror suspect, Muhammad Ahmed Muhammad, and he entered a London mosque dressed in Western clothing, and he left wearing a burqa. He managed to flee security services and evaded all cameras. So this piece was a way to mock the burqa bashing that actually ensued from that incident, which, you know, this kind of bashing of the burqa and the niqab always seeks to criminalise what women wear, in particular what Muslim women wear. So I just wanted to kind of mock that a little bit, but at the same time I was kind of mocking the burqa, but not in a reverent way, not completely. Another example was an interfaith football team called the Imams versus Clergy Football League. You don't often see imams and members of the clergy kind of doing this kind of stuff, but this is an initiative in Leicester, and it brought faiths together through football. And it highlighted how clubs like Aston Villa and Tottenham Hotspurs have roots in the church, who set up these football clubs to improve the community spirit. Now, is any Man City fans in the room? Well, maybe. Anyone know the original name for Man City, Manchester City? It was actually St. Mark's Church. So I thought that was a really interesting find as well. Another piece I wrote was it was called Happy British Muslims. Did anybody see this video? No one? You've all seen it. You may recognise one of your very respected lecturers from Cambridge, Tim Winter, who stoically held up a sign saying, "I'm happy." Now, this video was a prime example of Muslims creating their own positive media stories. This video had 1 million views in 3 days. There's now, I want to mute it. I mean, do you want to hear it? I don't know. Now it's actually got over 2 million views. So this was created by the Honesty Policy, who were inundated with positive feedback about the video. Non-Muslims actually loved this piece. Some Muslims didn't love it. There was a video called The Unhappy Muslims. but it didn't get as many views as the Happy Muslims video. Now this video, it made a difference. It made a positive difference. It's the first time people seen it. And I think it's important to provide that difference. I think I should pause it because I think it's getting a bit... Yeah, I'll do that. Sorry, can look at it later. So just to round up, it is a huge challenge being a person of faith in the media world. The challenge is finding positivity, finding authenticity, communication, connection, nuance and depth in what can be a very superficial environment. It's important to provide alternative stories to the dominant narrative. It's important to frame your own story, have your own voice in the media, whatever that is. Otherwise you get drowned out by the more unsavoury voices. There is a lot more to say, but I'm going to stop there to open up to some questions. But I hope that's been some food for thought, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Remona, for that really interesting talk. I think the format we want to take is to kind of open up the discussion as well as question and answer session. So if anyone has written down any questions, if you have it, that's okay. It's up to you if you want to start. You're okay, so Okay, if nobody has any questions written down, then do feel free to just shoot your hand up. Okay, start with. Want to ask a question?
Yeah. Why do you think?
Oh, sorry, I can't see you.
Can you stand up?
Why do you think it is that they frame Muslims in a negative light?
Why do I think that they frame Muslims in?
Yeah.
Well, news Latin. Oh God, this is terrible. Media. I just want to point out also that the media. We're using a very generic term. Media is also about. It's podcasts, can be radio programs, it's TV documentaries. So media often is seen as news analysis. I was using media as a more generic term. And now news analysis is by nature negative. And a lot of the stories that are out there around Muslims that are negative are going to be out there in the headlines. So it's a constant kind of challenge that Muslims are framed in a very negative way, that we are perpetrators of violence and extremism. Now, obviously that's the dominant narrative. If you look at what I mentioned about the Chapel Hill shooting, that wasn't something that was even a home-page news. You know, it was something that was buried in US news on The Guardian. Only The Independent was actually speaking out about the Chapel Hill shooting incident because it didn't fit the narrative of Muslims as the aggressor. So I think that we unfortunately are in this kind of media environment where the Muslims are the bad guy, but we need to really challenge that now through alternative voices. Unfortunately, it's a reality that we have to work within.
As a Muslim woman, have you personally faced discrimination in a media world that's so desperate to sort of paint women in Islamic setting?
Have I faced
discrimination personally?
Okay, so I work as a freelancer, so I'm not in the mainstream media world, I'm kind of on the fringe of it. So I haven't personally felt any discrimination, not from other colleagues. I've mainly worked with male Muslim colleagues, and they're always pushing me to the front, to be honest. With Exploring Islam Foundation, I haven't faced any discrimination. They have been saying to me, you go out there, we want you to lead. And that's not really, you don't normally hear that from the Muslim men in our community, unfortunately. But they were giving me the opportunity to kind of head up the campaign and just be kind of a representative for the organisation. So thank God I haven't had a lot of discrimination. I have had it out on the streets. So from people since 9/11, yeah, there have been incidents, and also my family members and friends have been at the receiving end of some Islamophobic attacks. So that's probably what's.
Thank you for the talk. I mean, I very much like the your initial major argument you made that we shouldn't be reactive and we shouldn't lose our energy by reacting all the time, and we should focus on our being or whatever and find our own indigenous elements to communicate with them. But what I saw actually in many things you showed, especially in the last video, in what you actually do, you do the same thing. I mean, the videos not only was reactive, you basically, because the Western media's goal is basically either to crush you completely, to say, or to make it to completely succumb to this discourse of modernity, right? To become basically the way they want you to become. And by this video, you basically showed them that, yeah, we're happy to become, what you want us to become. I mean, I can't see how that can actually contribute to, Muslim agenda of, showing your own values, because you don't show your own values. You basically show that we're embracing your values. We're embracing whatever image of Muslim you want to build and construct, right? So, I mean, can you...
No, it's a completely valid point.
What's your own vision of that? I mean, to me it was horrible. I mean, it's fine.
Well, just to clarify, I didn't make the video. I was featured in the video. I stopped it before we got to that point. But it was created by the honesty policy. Now, I take your point that that you're trying to say that it's like we're trying to buy into. Are you saying like Western?
Yeah, buying into.
Well, I myself, I'm proud to be in that video. I think that video is actually a very positive message. The messaging in there is that we're confident Muslims who live in Britain, we have religious freedoms, and I don't think it's a sellout video. It literally was just a laugh, and I think it really worked because it was so positive. It wasn't responding to, we weren't saying we're not terrorists, we weren't dancing around saying we weren't terrorists. We were saying we are happy, we're British Muslims, we belong in the West, we are Western. This is not a minority thing. We are part of the mainstream, and I think that's a very important message to come across. But of course, I understand the criticisms of the video.
Can I just, that's exactly what I said, that you, by that video and anything you show, you're again showing what you are not, while trying to show what you actually are. And that's what we're missing, as a Muslim community, and the message, the kind of message, any message we communicate, we're trying to show what we are not, while we actually have to focus on what we are. That's what we don't do, and that's what that video doesn't do.
Can I?
Okay, take.
Does anyone have anything to add to that? Because it would be useful to make this a discussion. So.
In what way is the video showing that we're not who we are?
She said, she said that we are not terrorists, we are not bad, we are not sad.
No.
That's what.
Can I? So okay, I understand what you're saying. I think that's a fair point. But in terms of we want to demonstrate what we are not, but that's in face of everything we're being accused of being. So is there really an alternative way to frame that, as opposed to just kind of saying
that was the subject of discussion, and that we should stop trying to react and say that we are not, and we try to come up with an alternative, whatever, right?
So basically, the brother's saying that this is still a reactionary video. That's your point. That it's still in reaction to the status quo, which is that Muslims are terrorists. But so I understand that.
No, it's not negative. I said it's the same.
No, I appreciate your point.
We have
I think the underlying assumption that you're trying to make is that all Muslims are somehow homogenous and that they have identical values and that they cannot identify with being British. I think the narrative that we need to progress with is a one of Britishness as well as of being a Muslim. So what you're saying is essentially Muslims have this particular identity, and by embracing British identity, they are somehow not losing the other identity. You have to go.
I don't think everyone needs to. Yeah, I kind of agree with you as well. But not everyone has to be happy about the Happy Muslims video. We have come from diverse backgrounds. We have diverse opinions, and it's fine to have this debate as well. That some people weren't happy with that at all, and I accept that. I do accept that, but I do think that it's a reflection of the British Muslim identity as well. One very important part of British Muslim identity, which is belonging and being proud to be British, which I don't see any problem with.
Does anyone else have anything?
That's great. Who was the video targeted at? Was it targeted at the non-Muslims or the Muslims?
It was. I think it was just for everyone. It was. Yeah. It was targeted at mainstream. So Muslims are included.
Yeah.
And we know that most kind of mainstream media sources still have a very particular kind of narrative, as you said, of Muslims. And obviously it's really important to kind of use the alternative kind of sources that you're doing, so the advertising campaigns and the websites and all that. But I still feel that it still feels like a kind of fringe voice in a sense. And what do you think? What do you think can be done to kind of challenge the dominant mainstream media kind of views and narratives?
Well, with the Inspired by Muhammad campaign, it wasn't fringe. It actually went mainstream. It was topical news, and it still is actually. And this is 5 years later. It was a 2-week campaign, PR campaign. We were hoping for a bit of coverage, but actually it got covered by national papers, by radio stations. It was creating media content. So I wouldn't call that wasn't a fringe campaign. I think that was a really important example of what a positive PR campaign can do. But yeah, we do need to do more. I mean, you can't just take that in isolation. We need to do so many things at many different levels, and it's an ongoing struggle. That we just need to have more voices in the media. We need to have more voices in every level of society, and also we need to show how we're contributing to our society, and that's what our faith also tells us to do. I was interviewed by a radio host recently. I'm going to name it. Was it the 3 Counties, BBC 3 Counties? And he was. Sometimes they try and polarize. They use polarizing questions. He asked me. Do you put your faith first, or do you put Britain first? And it was, you have to kind of, rise to the challenge of more intellectually challenged people, and often they're in those kind of positions of power. And my answer was, it's not a question of choosing one over the other. Here's a soundbite for you: mutually reinforcing loyalties. My faith tells me, my country gives me the freedom of religion. and my religion tells me to be loyal to my country. So these are two reinforcing loyalties. It's not one or the other. So it is very difficult to navigate these kind of media interviews, and you have to give a very quick soundbite answer, like in 10 seconds, and you have to try and give some nuance in that. But you know, we have to sometimes frame the question perhaps in a different way. Don't say I choose my faith or I choose my country in response to that. You have to be a little bit more, kind of give a bit more of a wiser answer.
We've got any other questions?
Yeah, hi. Do you not think that it's like regardless of any kind of positive contributions that Muslims have to the media, that those positive contributions are always going to be drowned out by more negative assumptions of Muslims, and that's kind of politically fueled?
Sorry, do you want to stand up and say that again? I don't think we can hear you.
Do you not think that any positive contributions that Muslims try and bring out into mainstream media are always going to fall flat compared to documentations of Muslims in a negative manner, just because the media is always politically affiliated? So it always feels like no matter what we say, it's always going to be drowned out. For example, the Chapel Hill shootings, the victims were Muslims who were extremely charitable, who were not in any way seen as like hateful. But it doesn't really matter like whether they were or whether they weren't, because it still wasn't documented.
Well, it's not easy. It's really not easy in the media world that we live in. But that doesn't mean that we have to give up. It means that we have to carry on. We have to struggle. That's our jihad. Am I allowed to say that on campus? Well, that is our struggle. That we need to carry on in the face of all adversity. There's actually I think it's a Native American story about, I think there was a forest fire, and there's a little hummingbird who's like carrying water in its beak to go and try and put out the fire, and all the other animals are like, what is the point? Why are you doing that? And the hummingbird's like, I'm doing my bit, doing my part. You know, even like Islamically, if you look at one of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that you know, you should, if you have a plant sapling in your hand, plant it even if it's the last hour. So we have to carry on and we have to continue. It is hard. I'm not saying it's easy. It's really difficult. I mean, the comments that I get under some of my Guardian articles are horrible. It's really, really nasty. Even if it's something pretty innocent that I'm writing about, they will say some very, very nasty things. But you know, you just have to carry on. Because if we start giving up, then there'll be nothing out there that's positive.
Thank you for your paper. It's really interesting. I think the Sun article, the headline that you had, it was very interesting and very demonstrative of this dominant media discourse of us and them, and the sort of the seeming incompatibility between being British and being Muslim. And I was just wondering what you think, other than say PR campaigns, what can be done within the media to try and combat this dominant us-them discourse?
Oh, yeah, I think that we need more Muslims in mainstream media. It's a lot better now than it was. There used to be, I think, there used to only be Yasmin Ali by Brown about 10 years ago. But these days we've got a lot more Muslims who are actually in editorial meetings, so they can actually encourage these kind of more positive stories around Muslims, and that is happening in the Guardian. I've seen a lot more kind of positive stories. Like some of them are coming from me, obviously, but and there's also other stories like in the other sections of the newspaper that shows Muslims that has nothing to do with the faith. So there was a piece about this woman who was trying to educate homeschool her child, and she had a hijab on. It had nothing to do with her faith. It was just about homeschooling her child, and I think that is really important as well, to show us as like normal human beings who've got the same kind of issues and worries as everybody else. And it doesn't always have to be faith issues directly. You know, we all live in the same society and we're all part of the same government. So yeah, we need more voices.
I was wondering, short of joining mainstream media, what do you think that we as students can do to help this bad PR problem?
I think your Islam Awareness Week is a brilliant example of what you can do. I think that it's come a long way since I was at uni. We had stuff like just show the message to everybody, and obviously nobody turned up. So you're very creative. I think the poetry evening was very creative. Inviting speakers in who are talking about very topical issues. I think you have to carry on doing that. Yeah, your ISOCs have come a long way since I was at university, but you have to remember I was at uni, I'm admitting my age here, but I was at uni pre-9/11. So, and there was no interest in Islam. There was no interest in what Muslim students were doing. But now the spotlight is on you. And I think it's a huge challenge as well for students, because you do get articles in some of the mainstream papers about the focus on segregation, for example. And I think it's just highlighting issues. They're not, sometimes they're just non-issues, to be honest. But I'm really hopeful that the Islamic societies can move forward and hopefully create more influence in the wider society. I think that was a bit of a rambling answer, sorry.
May I ask you what your views are on the Charlie Hebdo affair?
Yes, obviously it was a horrific incident, and I think that the media was saturated with articles about freedom of speech versus like Muslims. So it was polarizing. Again, a lot of the coverage was polarizing Muslims on one side and freedom of speech on the other. But actually, there was a senior member of the clergy. I'm not going to name him now, but he actually said that freedom of speech, freedom is being belittled when you demean and abuse a religion. Now, as a journalist, I do support freedom of speech. Anyway. But navigating that storm was very, very difficult. I was on Newsnight being asked, are you happy with saying, oh, je suis Charlie? How do you feel about the whole affair? And the Muslims had to react, but we had to make sure that we were doing it in a very intelligent and sensitive way. And I think that some people weren't always responding in kind of an intelligent way, which got more headlines. And the repercussions of that were very worrying. What happened in the Jewish supermarket, and then also the repercussions on mosques. So it was like violence begets violence, and that's what my worry is, that this is carrying on. This cycle is carrying on, and hatred is begetting hatred, and we are feeding into the extremist agendas who want to polarize societies. In fact, these kind of horrific acts, increases Islamophobia. And it just pits us against each other, when what we need is solidarity and unity and togetherness. So yeah, there's a lot to say about that, but I can't say it all right now. But I can discuss it with you afterwards.
Yeah. Another question. English people watch the television and they see what ISIS are doing in the Middle East, in Syria, in Iraq. And the British Muslims say, we're a religion of peace and we love other religions, and yet English people see what ISIS are doing, they're Sunni Muslims, so these two views aren't compatible, are they? If the ISIS Muslims, the Sunnis, are doing what they're getting up to, which is not peaceful, why are the Muslims in England and the Western Europe saying that Islam is a religion of peace?
Okay, so obviously whatever ISIS are doing is completely departed from Islamic principles and teachings. I have no idea where they're getting their kind of agendas from, but this is like neo-jihadism as well, which is very much about territory expansion, and it's very little to do with religion. It's about power and political gain. And I think neo-jihadism is something that's quite different to the older jihadism, and it's a really scary and frightening movement that's happening at the moment. But I don't quite understand what you were trying to ask about is it you're trying to say that Muslims here are saying Islam is peace, but ISIS are obviously violent aggressors?
Perceived as sort of warmongers.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. They are warmongers.
Yeah, so that's fine, thank you.
Oh right, I just wanted to clarify. Okay. Yeah, I obviously reject whatever ISIS are doing. Yeah.
Can you take the lady behind you?
There was a discussion after the events in Australia a few months ago and after the attack in Paris last week whether it's right to label them as Islamic terrorist attacks. What would you think about that?
So what happened in Sydney? Yeah, I think terminology is very important. We're very quick, media is very quick to label anything involving Muslims as a terrorist attack, when often it's just a pure and brutal murder. Like for example, terrorist was not used in the Chapel Hill shooting incident at all because the perpetrator wasn't Muslim. I think that yes, it's sadly part of the role that Muslims play in the media that they are a terrorist or an aggressor. So we need to. Well, it's hard to challenge, but at the moment the media is casting Muslims as the terrorist, and I think that Chapel Hill shooting really does kind of highlight how biased the media can be against Muslims. They have to be careful, the media. But I think they even there was an incident. I don't know if you remember. There was a bomb incident outside Tipton Mosque. I think it was a few years ago, and they actually called it a terrorist incident. This is like one of the first times I'd ever seen that happen. That they said that the mosque was the victim, and that this terrorist bomb was placed outside this mosque. And I thought, wow, that's going to really challenge people. But sadly, in the same article, in the first paragraph, it said, oh, and there were 3 people who went to the mosque who went to Guantanamo Bay. But they didn't carry on to say that they were actually acquitted, that they were innocent. So they still managed to get the Muslims as terrorists in that article. So the headline was almost promising, but then you read the first paragraph.
Do we have any written questions? I can see some paper floating about. If you do you want
I have to sit down for a minute.
Yeah, so. Any? No? Right. Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. It's very inspiring. I think I'd like to carry on from the gentleman's question about ISIS and of course the emotional impact that it has on Europe and Italians, and now the situation in Libya has been massively on the news because it's just a few kilometres south of Sicily. And I was just wondering, and this seems to be a lot on the news in Italy, where is the moderate Arabs' voice in terms of, I think what you're doing and as a student like yours and student organisation is absolutely commendable, but do you think that there are also authorities, religious authorities, political authorities, moderate Arab states, are they voicing the fact that ISIS is nothing, it's got nothing to do with Islam? Am I just missing out, or are they not speaking up as they should?
There is condemnation from all over the Muslim world, and it has been like that for the past decade. But unfortunately, the media doesn't always pick up on these voices of condemnation, and it keeps pushing that notion that Muslims are not even that we are all kind of in the same game, that we're all supporting it if we're not condemning it. But actually there's been condemnation from all the authorities, like even what happened recently with that horrific burning of the Jordanian pilot. The sheikhs in Mecca were condemning it, but you're not going to get that covered in the UK media because it doesn't really fit the narrative, and also it's just too complex for people, you know, because the media can be a very simplistic machine as well. It's very black and white, so that's yeah, it's worrying that people think that Muslims don't even condemn this, because of course any sane human being is going to condemn attacks like that. They're horrific crimes against our fellow human beings, so it should be a given. But sadly, there is this kind of constant pressure on Muslims to publicly condemn it. But it is out there. It's definitely out there. I can send you loads of links to organisations that have condemned it.
If anyone does have any written questions, just pass them forward and we'll handle the speaker. But I have a question before we carry on. So we're speaking about kind of framing alternative narratives that kind of demonstrate the Muslim voice. So one way that that's kind of found ground recently is through social media. And this ties in with this question that we had given about, is it dangerous when we have to rely on all Muslims to show what Islam's message actually is? And is there a danger of conflating the message with perhaps ill-informed views and those getting picked up and then...
You mean on like Twitter? And
yeah.
I do believe in the power of social media. I think like the who was Muhammad? The hashtag who was Muhammad? Who is Muhammad? After the Charlie Hebdo attacks, they printed their front page apparently had the Prophet on it, and in response to that on Twitter there was a hashtag that was who is Muhammad, and that was trending worldwide, and it was a brilliant opportunity, and it was Muslims who were actually saying this is who the Prophet was. You know, he played with his grandchildren. Like they played on his back while he was praying. He was a champion of women's rights, of the environment. He was a model of coexistence. So it was actually a great opportunity that social media took in a positive way. Obviously, because it's out there for everyone, it also runs the danger of kind of crazy voices also hijacking that. So I think that social media is a powerful tool, but we have to approach it very, very carefully. So, for example, I don't retweet articles unless I've read them. A lot of articles have clickbait. They've just got these headlines that make you kind of like retweet it, but actually sometimes it's very, very misleading because the actual article's not really about the headline. So I would encourage you to read the articles before you retweet them. So yeah, we have to have responsible engagement with social media.
Do more questions? I'll limit it to one per person for now, so I'll come back to you.
Instead of the PR campaign, do you think there should be a focus on tackling the grassroots issues based on Muslims? So, for example, Muslims make up 15% of the general Muslim population, despite only making up 5% of the general population. Muslim youths have some of the highest unemployment rates. But they feel that they should be attacking with those issues, kind of a good PR will follow, rather than needing sort of a PR campaign.
I don't think it's a question like doing one thing instead of the other. Everything has to happen at the same time. So there already are lots of grassroots organisations that are tackling these socio-economic issues, and you know the fact that there are so many Muslims in prison. So I think that all work has to be going on at the same time to like kind of further our society. So it's not one or the other, it's everything. We have to tackle everything at the same time. And this is just my area. PR is just my area. There's charity, there are like, you know, there's even a drugs rehabilitation program in Tower Hamlets, for example, which has got huge problems with alcohol abuse and drug addiction. There's a Muslim charity there that's set up to help rehabilitate drug users. So there are things happening all over the UK. And this is just my area, but yeah, everyone is doing very good work. But more needs to be done. I'm tired now, by the way.
Do you think that certain campaigns are in danger of, or certain organisations' campaigns are in danger of maybe scapegoating other Muslim communities? So obviously there are different denominations of Muslims in this country. And certain narratives are fed to the media to scapegoat other groups of Muslims. Now, I've seen that quite recently. You can see the effects of that almost within policy making and so on. Do you think?
Are you referring to anything in particular recently?
Not in particular, but I mean, there's certain. I mean, I've seen certain programs such as Panorama, etc., where there's there's Muslims then sort of almost scapegoating other groups of Muslims, and then you see Ofsted inspections, etc., which are talking about Islamic schools, and then somehow, you know, if you're not meeting the maybe the happy video format of a Muslim, then you're the bad guy. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I see your point. With regards to the Panorama program, that came after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. It's just to give some kind of focus. They actually interviewed. The way they framed the interview with the Islam Channel guy was I think, quite. It was quite. What's the word when you kind of manipulative? He didn't really have it. They were basically saying, you know, you call yourself the voice of the voiceless, or you feel like you're oppressed. And the way they kind of set it up was very dark imagery around it, and it made it seem very, very kind of ominous. I think that was really worrying, and then they kind of juxtaposed that with British Muslim TV.
Yes,
yeah, that is it is worrying and it's very dangerous. But we, you know, you have to look at the agendas as well of like, anyway, Panorama is essentially pretty much a witch hunt. The agenda of Panorama. So you do have to like watch these with that kind of in the back of your mind and see how they're framing all of these different interviews and making British Muslim TV look like the moderate voice. Yeah, so yeah, it is out there, and yeah, we just have to be very aware of those kind of agendas. That's a good point.
We'll take one more question for the formal Q&A, and there will be time to discuss afterwards. So I'm just going to be. Do you have a question, John?
Yeah.
Okay.
With the likes of anti-charity and other methods out there, how do we ensure that the right types of Muslims represent us in the media?
Question. You know, a lot of media outlets don't have a lot of like good contacts. So I'm following up by saying I was contacted by Newsnight, and they said, look, we need a Muslim to come on to talk about Charlie Hebdo. Now, and she said that she'd actually contacted quite a few Muslims, but they didn't want to go on the programme. Now, these are people who I thought would be someone that I would feel more comfortable going on to Newsnight. But, you know, Muslims are actually really worried and scared about going out there in the media eye because they're worried that they're going to come under attack, which they often do for whatever they say. You know, that's part of the game in the media. You have to kind of accept that as part of your role. But we need to be more articulate, we need to be more media savvy as Muslims, because those are the sound bites that people remember. You know, people remember Anjum Chowdhury, they remember, who's the other guy? Umar Bakri, because they used to go on these programs and they used to dominate the image of Muslims because they were the only ones going out there. But also, a lot of these programs were only asking them because they knew that would be a crowd puller. You know, a lot of viewers would watch it because it's sensational. But I think that those things are also changing more recently. So on Newsnight, there was myself and 2 other women on the panel, which was a rare thing to see. So it's 3 women, 3 Muslim women talking on Newsnight. There was a lot of tweeting about that this is a very positive move. But the reason why that happened is because the producer was actually a Muslim woman. So that is why I think it's really important for Muslims to be more engaged in the media, in those kind of levels of programming and producing, because it will make a difference. And she said, look, I'm a Muslim myself, and I know what I would want to hear, so that's why I want, you know, your voice out there and other women, because we often just see, I'm not saying that men shouldn't go out there, but it's just being dominated by Muslim men, and I think we need to see more diversity, because we're probably more than half the Ummah actually. Women are more than half the Ummah. But yeah, so I think that was a positive move forward, but it is really scary. Yeah, I was scared when I went on Newsnight, but I pushed myself to do it, because I said, look, if I don't go on, you know, it might be someone else who may be a bit of a nutter, so it might be safer if I went.
I'd like you all to just join me again and thank Remona for a wonderful talk and discussion.